is now
the
exiting.
For the Des Moines Public Schools to order. Please take the roll.
Miss Anderson,
Here.
Mr. Barron, Miss Bradley,
Here.
Miss Caldwell Johnson, Mr. Cody,
Here.
Miss Delagardelle,
Here.
Miss Sawyer.
Here. Terry Caldwell Johnson is here.
Great. I did see that Rob joined us, but he might not be able to actually be in a place where he can talk right now. So, all right, the first item of business this evening is the approval of the agenda. May I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda?
Move approval.
Second.
Caldwell Johnson.
Bradley, second.
Thank you. Aaron, please take the roll.
Anderson, Mr. Barron,
Yes.
Miss Bradley. Oh, you
Yes.
did already. Okay.
Yeah.
Miss Caldwell Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Cody,
Yes.
Miss Delagardelle,
Yes.
Miss Sawyer.
Yes.
Okay, so I believe the motion is approved. Is it 601 or 701?
I was a yes. I was muted. Sorry.
7-0.
701 or 70. The next item on our agenda is approval of the minutes for Tuesday, March 3rd, 2020. May I have a motion and a second to approve the minutes?
So moved, Anderson.
Second, Caldwell Johnson.
We have a motion by Anderson and a second by Caldwell Johnson. Aaron, go ahead and please call our roll call vote. Board
Anderson,
members, if you could please mute
Yes.
until you're ready to speak. That will help delay feedback.
Yes.
Barron,
Yes.
Bradley,
Yes.
Caldwell Johnson,
Yes.
Cody,
Yes.
Delagardelle,
Yes.
and Sawyer.
Yes.
The vote is approved 7-0. We have no district recognition tonight, correct, Dr. Ehart?
That is correct.
All right. The next item on the agenda is the consent items. We allow any person or persons the opportunity to speak to the board for up to 5 minutes following the presentation of an agenda item. If anyone wishes to speak to an agenda item, please go to the information desk to sign up. Remarks must be germane to the agenda, and we ask that you avoid references to personalities and character attacks, as those types of comments serve no productive purpose. We do appreciate your input. As a reminder to the board and public, the board will not engage in discussion or deliberation with a speaker regarding comments made to agenda items. Discussion and deliberation will remain among board members, with speakers' comments informing said discussion, deliberation, and determinations as deemed necessary. Ms. Caldwell Johnson, I believe you have the consent motion.
I do. Give me just a moment. My phone died, so here we go. I move that the board approve the consent items in accordance with the recommended action for each item on the consent agenda, including bills previously authorized, certified, and approved for payment by the board secretary in the amount of $11,941,719.78, and procurement card transactions in the amount of $677,942.75.
Is there a second?
Second, Cody.
All right, we have a motion by Caldwell Johnson and a second by Cody. Any discussion or questions related to any of these agenda items, board members? Okay, Tom, I just had a couple quick questions, and I think we had discussed these this afternoon, but I'm going to ask them again just for the benefit of our community. How is COVID-19 and the current pandemic affecting the work on renovations and buildings and that sort of thing that we typically will start beginning here in the next couple weeks?
That's a great question, and it's a little too early to tell. One thing that we do know is that we have a lot of contractors who are eager to do work, so we're really taking those on a project by project basis. We're we're limiting any work, from 3 weeks ago through whenever we are coming back to school to locations where we know we will not have any staff, and then we'll have a period of time from when that work is completed that we'll have before we have any of our staff in to make sure that we've sanitized everything and we have it ready for staff. So we don't anticipate that being a concern. However, it's sort of a play it by ear kind of mode. So for instance, we have work going on right now at the East High School auditorium. That's a very big project, and the contractors were really eager to make hay with that project, and we really want that to be on time. So they're limited to the space that they have access to, and before we have any of our staff in there, we will have that sanitized. The other projects that we have going on are outdoor in nature, so not as much of a concern. So right now, that's really kind of a play it by ear kind of question, but a very appropriate one.
Okay, so our community may continue to still see work happening in our buildings, even though they're closed to students and staff at this time.
Yep, they may.
Okay, perfect. And then I think there was there's a contract on here for rental of technology computers that we needed to update that bid a little bit, but can you remind us what the rental period was on that? Sorry, I thought I'd sent that one to you too. If not, you can just let me know.
I didn't. Well, yeah, I didn't. I missed the other part of your question, but it's a 4-year lease that was approved in January. But this was a portion of the contract that it's kind of in 2 pieces. The piece that we're asking for tonight is the maintenance and repair portion of the lease. So we had just neglected to get that on with the first one, with the one that you approved. So it's a 4-year lease of 7,800 student devices.
Okay, and then the other question was just related to hiring for staff for next year. Have we been in contact with any staff that we may have already hired for next school year regarding, any changes in what's going on affect their start dates or anything?
Yes,
Okay.
Everybody is any new hires, and we are, by the way, continuing to hire, especially for those positions that are high need, like bus drivers, and virtually all of our teaching positions. So they're just notified that currently we're essentially on lockdown mode, and so they're having to take a wait and see attitude and wait for us to give us as much time as we need to be able to make a determination as to actual start date. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
At this point in time, though, we don't see a need to modify contracts or anything.
Okay.
We don't think it will come to that, but great question.
Okay, I just wanted to raise up the importance to make sure we're also staying in contact with employees that might be beginning in our new fiscal year. So.
Right.
Okay, I don't have any other further discussion or questions. Board, does anyone else before we go to our vote? All right, Erin, will you please call our roll call?
Ms. Anderson,
Yes.
Mr. Barron,
Yes.
Ms. Bradley,
Yes.
Caldwell Johnson,
Yes.
Cody,
Yes.
Della Gardell,
Yes.
and Sawyer.
Yes.
Okay, the next item on our agenda is item E1, which is an update on our social and emotional limitation 2.10. Dr. Ahart, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you and your team for this presentation.
Yeah, thank you. So we have both Jake Troja and Laura Fefchak with us this evening, as we have in the previous SEL reports. Obviously, work on this project as well as a number of other projects where we're trying to engage a wide range of our staff and moving forward has been a bit of a challenge. We've had at least a couple of meetings on the SEL task force delayed or postponed, I guess I should say, because of the interruption that we began experiencing at spring break. So we're not quite as far along as we would like to be at this time. Focus hasn't changed, and it has given us a little bit more time to deal with some of the data that we've been actively collecting from our students and staff. And I just would lift up also, the officers and I have talked about just generally our monitoring reports moving forward for the rest of this year. And I think we'll be calendaring and agenda planning a time to discuss process moving forward for monitoring reports moving forward, as well as a discussion around setting our SEL SMART goal, which we had talked about last summer, setting this spring. So just to sort of reframe this for everyone. And with that, I will turn things over to Jake and Laura.
Good evening. This is Laura. It's nice to be with you all this evening in this, I guess, modified way. I just wanted to double check. Is it Aaron that's moving the slides?
It's Jake.
Oh, Jake. Okay, that's good. I just wasn't sure who was in charge of that. So, all right, well, we will go ahead and get started. So these first several slides are just, again, introductions to who we are, about the management limitation that was adopted last year, and the management limitation, the 6 pieces of that in this next slide that we have really focused. These 6 components have really focused our work and offered and acted as a roadmap for us as we've started to dig in deeper into social emotional learning in DMPS.
All right, so we're going to do a brief update, and everybody can hear me okay, correct? Yep, coming through,
Yes.
Laura? Okay, perfect.
Yes, I can hear you.
So this update, in the previous 2 updates, we have organized around kind of the tasks or the work that we've been doing, and we'd like to organize this around the limitation itself. And so looking at these 3 limitations, the first 2 and number 6, we've combined those into what we would consider integrated services. And so the updates from here on out will really be around specifically the number on the limitation. And for this one, we're really talking about integrated services. At the beginning of this school year, we really dug into integrated services when we started looking at not only the board limitation, but our work as a student supports team and as a larger team. And so our work has really been centered around several different things. This is a major framework that has allowed us to really focus that work on integrated services. And so I just wanted to kind of point out to this framework a little bit of who the author organizations are. And these are obviously national organizations that were very prominent. We have the ASCA, or the American School Counselor Association. We have our National Association of School Psychologists, school resource officers, and then our elementary and secondary principals groups are on here, are author organizations. The reason that's important is that this document is really pointing us and giving us solid strategies and policies moving towards integrated services as we think about that in the student supports lens district-wide. In addition to the author organizations, there was 35 national endorsing organizations. You can see that CASEL is listed on here as well, the Coalition of Community Schools, Mental Health America, National PTA, NEA as well as an endorsing organization. So this has lots of clout and is a very well-recognized researched brief and framework. The major recommendations that we felt that are coming out of this that spoke to the integrated services are these 3 here. Which is number 1, improving staff ratios to allow for the delivery of a full range of services and effective school community partnerships. 2 was about the support of MTSS district-wide. And 3 was about the development of evidence-based standards for district-level policy. And those are the 3 major recommendations that came out of this framework that really had implications on our work as an integrated services team, as it not only related to SEL, but as it related to the larger scope of this limitation speaks to.
So when we were before you the last time, we were getting it ready to participate in what CASEL refers to as the readiness and engagement analysis. And just as a review, this next slide talks about that process, the school visits that took place in January, the focus groups. Could you forward the slide, Jake? the focus groups that were participants as well. It was our goal that we would have broad representation of voices and authentic voices in the process. So making sure that we had teachers, that we had building leaders, that we had district level staff participating in this process. So last Friday, we had an opportunity to have a conversation over Zoom with the Castle team that came and conducted the readiness and engagement analysis, where they talked through what were some of the strengths and some of the challenges. So I think for the purposes of our discussion tonight, we would like to focus on those strengths and challenges and how they connect to our work around integrated services and moving forward with the SEL work in general. So overall, the Castle team reported that they found that there was a great deal of widespread enthusiasm for inclusion of SEL as one of the district-wide goals. They found that the superintendent and associate superintendent expressed an understanding that SEL is indeed linked to equity and academic outcomes beyond just the explicit SEL-related goal that we are in the process of developing. Another strength was that there exists capacity within the Des Moines Public Schools in terms of staff roles and departments that could support systemic SEL implementation. Some of the conversations that we had with them were what were some of those roles that could potentially be revisited or repurposed to serve as more powerful levers for transferring SEL information to the schools. So we'll be talking further about that. Again, that's linked to integrated services delivery model. The academic structures, number 3, that currently exist in the district were lifted up as strengths, and they indicated the elementary literacy curriculum, IB schools, and schools for rigor could all potentially be models for integrating SEL into academic instruction. And we know that the EL literacy curriculum in particular has SEL at its core. And so this can serve as a good launching pad for integrating SEL and academics. Along with that, though, is the importance of teachers needing time to plan and prepare to reinforce this learning and spread the integration of the knowledge. A fourth strength was the collaborative problem-solving teams that exist in the district already around algebra, literacy, and SEL. Castle identified them as being a strength we could leverage and potentially evolve into a district-wide SEL steering committee. The professional learning structures that are currently in existence could be used to support SEL knowledge and capacity building. So what we are working on right now at the SEL district task force level is looking at what would that professional learning look like for year 1, 2, and beyond, and who would be receiving what content. So those conversations actually were occurring this afternoon. Another strength that they identified was that they, in their visits to different programs and schools, they noticed that there were already some evidence-based SEL programs in use in the district, that many of these programs have been implemented as a result of grassroots efforts that were researched, funded, and implemented autonomously by individual schools. So it is out there, and they were able to observe some of those practices. Another strength that the Castle team lifted up was our research and evaluation team in terms of offering a great asset for sustaining SEL implementation through assessment and the continuous improvement process. And they've been involved with our SEL work, with Panorama, with the collaborative problem solving, so we will continue to partner closely with them. One of the things that the report also highlighted were some of the bright spots of SEL throughout the district. And I just wanted to share a couple of those with you because I think it's helpful for us to know maybe some of those more detailed observations that they made. At the preschool level, administrators have led this work by recognizing needs and pursuing funding that would fill necessary gaps, such as the hiring of staff for positions as a family engagement facilitator and a school nurse. The preschool PLC reviews data weekly, looking for growth in proficiency in math, literacy, and SEL. Castle did outline in their report that the SEL implementation structure at Mitchell University Universal Preschool could be used as a model school as the district begins to work on the rollout process. Additionally, at Brubaker Elementary, SEL is embedded in a multi-tiered system of support with several layers of SEL instruction and intervention. That staff at Brubaker have also worked to engage the youth around the analysis of the SEL panorama data. And at Callanan Middle School, they have an adult SEL PLC that is led by a school social worker, and they were able to observe some of the models of practice when they were visiting at Callanan. So in addition to the strengths, the Castle team outlined some of the challenges that we may face moving forward in this work at with the district our size. One of the first things that they talked about was the lack of a strategic plan. And I just wanted to point out that this report was actually written prior to us sharing our Des Moines Public Schools goal action plan with them, because that plan was just developed in March recently. So we do have more of a plan in place, and the Castle team was able to look at that as well. So I think we're moving towards mitigating that first challenge. They did note that there was a lack of a shared understanding of SEL in general in the groups that they visited with, which in some ways is not surprising since we have not had a coordinated effort around SEL up until this point. One of the concerns that they heard around this, though, was that there was a concern that SEL would be seen as the fix for students rather than focusing on the system of supports that is needed for a true systemic SEL implementation. And part of that is because our professional learning isn't targeting SEL right now. So I particularly appreciated their comment around that. Some of the respondents that they talked to indicated things like, we talk about SEL aspirationally, but I don't know how to do it. And we lack intentionality around the SEL work because we haven't all had the needed training. So certainly can't argue those points that people brought up. Initiative fatigue was another challenge that the team identified, in that the district has a history of starting new initiatives without investing sufficient resources and time before jumping to the next new thing. There was a concern that some staff have felt overwhelmed by multiple initiatives running simultaneously. And again, I think that those points are certainly well-founded, and we need to take those into consideration as we move forward. Along with that is the educators feeling stretched too thin to cover the current content and the current initiatives, and the ability to take on one more thing. So that really speaks to the need for leadership, our leadership, and being able to connect the current initiatives with SEL in ways that are more intentional, so that teachers are not having to make those connections on their own. So that Jake and I view as our work at the district level. The other challenge was about facing budgetary limitations. And I know we have talked about this before with you, and that as we move towards having a tighter plan for this SEL work, we'll need to maybe make some difficult decisions about what the priorities are, given that we have those budget limitations. Building and level autonomy was listed as a strength, but also a challenge, in that it could be an unexpected challenge because this autonomy can ultimately engender a lack of consistency across the district, which can lead to inequitable opportunities for students. So without unifying practices or expectations, it's challenging at the district level to support something like SEL. So we have to be thoughtful about what types of autonomy school leaders may have as we move forward with this. Another challenge that they identified in their conversations with the various stakeholders was the perception that departments at the district level are siloed. And as we know, the superintendent has recently expanded cabinet, so there is a desire to make sure that we are less siloed. So again, I think making sure that as we begin this work, that all teams, The evaluation and assessment team, for example, was one that was lifted up to make sure that all players are part of the planning from the get-go and not inadvertently left out of the process. Another challenge was the professional learning, the knowing versus the doing, that while we do have professional learning time outlined, that sometimes it is not always used effectively. Staff have not yet received guidance around how to connect and operationalize the priorities of their roles. Additionally, participants talked through important professional development around equity and white fragility and related topics, but these have not necessarily been intentionally linked to measurable shifts in district practice, in their opinion. So there was a sense through some of the conversations that school leadership and staff did not universally feel authorized to prioritize SEL. So some of the stakeholders that spoke to the CASEL team expressed that they didn't feel that they had permission or support to focus on SEL, and that it was sometimes being that they should be driving home academics, but for their team, they felt like the SEL was a priority. So again, from the district level, being clear so that those concerns don't feel burdensome to building leaders. There was also some comments around teachers being unclear about whether focusing on SEL was appropriate for their role. So again, the recommendation from CASEL about clearing this up, that SEL actually is the job of everyone who works in a school district and who is connected to students on a daily basis. One of the final concerns that they lifted up was just the fidelity and consistency of programs. As it was listed in strengths, that some of those grassroots level SEL programs that are currently in place are sometimes cobbled together at the site level rather than being integrated into a larger plan. So we want to make sure that those are being implemented with fidelity, which again takes district support and leadership to make that happen. So as we've talked about the strengths and the challenges that CASEL identified, one of the heaviest lifts for us in this process is to address those siloed comments and about how it is that we can integrate our system better in order to make sure that the recommendations for CASEL are going to be put forth and that we have structures in place. So as you can see on this slide, these were their general overarching recommendations, again, going back to the unifying vision around SEL, MTSS equity and academics, that strategic plan, working on the professional development for all adults, and just as an awareness issue for the board that, Jake and I have really taken what CASEL has said to heart, and we know that schools are anxious and ready to get going and buy curriculum and things like that. But we do really want to go slow and steady and make sure that we are rolling out the support for adults first. And so that may feel a bit odd for people, but one of the things that CASEL did talk about was making sure that starting with the board and central office, that SEL is understood in a comprehensive way before it's rolled out to buildings and to teachers and to students. So we believe that is also the right thing to do. When they talked about structure and support at the central office for SEL, what they were referring to was ensuring that there was cabinet level representation for SEL and the initiatives that will be moving forward. So we already have that in place. There's structured autonomy for school buildings so that they know that while these are the things that are loose, these are the things that are going to be tight, and that we can appreciate the importance of doing that for our building leaders. They did reference the district's worked around collective efficacy, and their recommendation was to continue to strengthen that work, to continue to leverage our data and assessment team, focusing on school climate. That's work that's been going on for the last 5 years, but also making sure that that people do not necessarily see SEL as completely separate from school climate, that those things work together. And then the 9th recommendation, continuing our partnership with the Iowa Department of Education, which we will continue to do. So what this means moving forward is, as Jake mentioned earlier, we have a group of people that have been talking through what would integrated services look like. So from that report that Jake referenced, we have looked at what are some of those national ratios recommended for counselors, social workers, school psychologists, and community school coordinators, and how well our staffing patterns reflect these national recommendations. So as you can see on the left, that's the national recommendation, and on the right is the current ratio for those various support roles. And you'll also remember that when we talked through, when we had staff complete the panorama survey about needing more support, these were the responses. We shared these with you the last time, but this actually does really line up in terms of those integrated services staff members and who those people are and what their roles would be. That does line up with what our staff have been asking for. So then when we look at this next slide about the national recommended ratios, what our group has done is looked at positions as we have been able to revisit positions and revision positions, so that we have looked at ways that we can reduce our ratios to become more in line with those national ones. We are a very large district, so this is work that is going to take place over time. But I think that having the support of the board, having the support of district office to recognize that if we are moving towards this integrated service model, that then this is what this looks like. Like, this is really the numbers that we are talking about. And the next slide talks about that as well, in terms of what would it take to get us there. So those are some pretty startling numbers. And we are under no illusion that we are going to get there quickly, but I do believe that our integrated services team believes that this is a good guide, and we've started to have conversations about looking at piloting this type of model in a number of schools that is manageable to start with, and working from there, setting up those systems and structures, and moving onward from there. So just to ensure that we are all working on this together, the integrated services that we've just been referencing, we are making sure that that is embedded into the new district MTSS team. That is also going to be looking at how we are meeting our board goals, that there is voice from multiple different departments on that MTSS leadership team. Things will get vetted through that team so that there is alignment in terms of professional development and service delivery. And then the final slide just talks about those foundational tier and universal tier, where we would find integrated services. And again, we see equity in place here through both of those tiers. And again, SEL is part of that universal tier.
Great. Before we move on, did we want to stop and maybe, I don't know if there's any questions at this point in time. It might be easier to answer questions as we go along than at the very end.
That was a lot of information, so.
It was, yeah.
Yeah, I was just trying to look at your infographic a little bit more closely because it was difficult. If you could you go back? There's like the long, yeah, that one. It was really difficult. It's really difficult to read all those pieces. And then I was trying to pull it up on my computer and couldn't get it. So.
Yeah, so we just, I don't know if this is helping as I'm projecting this and showing you kind of how this looks, but feel free to jump in here. What we wanted to articulate with this model is that we are working on an MTSS structure, which is highlighting what the recommendations were from, not only from Castle, but from the leading organization, so that we discussed earlier in that research brief. And that results in us not only, one, having a plan, which is what this MTSS leadership team is really working on, is ensuring that we have a strategic plan and that we're implementing it, but also we have MTSS structures across the district, and we really feel like this is the team that will help us organize and meet the goals and the expectations that we need to meet regarding this integrated services. If you look back on that, like the previous slide here, we're talking about 179 staff members to be able to make national ratios. So we really have to be coming to this team with how we can do business together. And so we just wanted to articulate that on this slide.
Yeah, and I think the other thing this highlights, Jake, too, is I think this would be a really great infographic that as we start to educate our community about work around this priority, because the community, you know, a year ago came to our sessions and told the board that this is a priority of our community. I think including, I mean, I know that there represents the vision and values of the community, but I think, you know, to kind of loop that in, or once we go ahead and present, you know, this kind of push this out to the community and give them, you know, that here's the plan, which I know board had hoped that we'd be able to do some linkage with our community this year, but I think those plans are going to be put on hold at least for the next couple months, but we can continue those conversations too. So.
Yeah, and I don't mean to speak over Tom if you jump in here too, but this infographic is meant to articulate that the school board has, you know, has set the goals for us. That's really set, you know, the targets that we're shooting for, that the MTS team has then created a strategic plan around to meet those goals, and then how we're working within the structures in the district to ensure that schools are going to ultimately have outcomes for students that meet the goals as well. So that's hopefully what that is conveying.
Yeah, and I'm hoping you'll also convey to our schools and our staff, you know, at the district level and across the district that, you know, this goal came from our community too. Like, this is what leaders in our community, parents, have identified as a need for their kids. So.
Absolutely, and I just want to double down here that you've seen some of these before, but maybe not in this infographic here around what our levers are in terms of the strategic plan. And so you see social emotional learning there in the universal tier as if we see it fit in that universal instruction piece. Any other questions before we move on?
Jake, this is Terry, and could you go back to, I think there were 2 consecutive slides, one that had the recommended and current ratios, and then I think there was another slide prior to that. Yeah, so this looks like a really steep hill to climb. And I know that one of the challenges that was identified earlier in the presentation had to do with our fiscal situation and our ability to even get to what the recommended ratio is going to be pretty significant for us. So I guess my question really goes to strategically or tactically, maybe even, what are you thinking about how we skin the cat when our personnel complement isn't necessarily aligned, or aligned is the best word I can think of, to really meet the requirements of the rigor associated with ramping up for this work?
If I may step in here, that's a great question, Terry, and one that we're absolutely wrestling with. One of the things, and no, this isn't a step-by-step, here's how we're going to get there kind of response, but one of the things that we're attempting to do, not just with this goal, but particularly with this goal in terms of getting the staff ratios where we want, is really taking a very honest and deep look at where we are in terms of our tier 1 across the board. What has happened over time, and this is not unique to Des Moines, but certainly something that we've been trying to dismantle and rebuild, is this idea that we have our standard program and it's the standard program no matter what. And when that's not serving, 80-85% of the student body, then we'll add on additional programs to meet the needs of those for whom the standard program or tier 1 program is not working. So one of the things that has been happening, at least under my tenure, is you may remember, if we go back to, I don't know, the 2012, 2013, actually probably back to across the 2010, when there was the across the board budget cuts. There was one of the casualties of that was a reduction in counselors. Building principals had very challenging decisions to make, and counselors that retained their position, and again, this is speaking very generally, really weren't really just doing what we want to expect of school counselors. They were filling a whole bunch of other roles as well. And so as we've sort of built that program back up, we're trying to be very disciplined about limiting what we're asking of counselors to actually what school counselors are intended to do and what they're trained to do. And we think that getting tier 1 right, even in SEL, just as it is with all of the academic areas, will allow us to repurpose staff from what we might call a level 2 or level 3 intervention program to the tier 1 level of support, thereby reducing the need, if we do tier 1 real well, the need for as high a staffing ratio as we need currently in tier 2 and tier 3. And Jake may have more to add to that.
Yeah, I wish to say, remind the board, we made, you guys supported the tough decision about, moving Scavo from a school to a program. And that allowed us to make some additional staffing changes here, where we've lowered ratios from 420 to 360 counselors. We were to add several social workers and several psychologists to lower those ratios. And so I think, reevaluating and what Tom said, but continue coming back to the MTSS team to make tough decisions about tier 1 supports, and then coming back to the board table and asking and making recommendations to you to consider tough decisions. I think that's the best way that we're going to be able to accomplish what we know as, a foundational support for us to be able to have success. And there's some of these positions like school psychologists that we are several thousand students away, 55 employees. Part of the reason there's such a low in that, and Laura can talk to this more than I can, is defining those psychologists is difficult. And so we've been able to hire some recently because of the tough decisions that you were able to make regarding Scavo. So I think that's just multiple times coming that check and balance about MTS, but also just making sure that we're focusing and narrowing our down to what we feel like are the levers to successfully meet the board goals.
So this is Kelly, and I do have or Terry, do you have more questions? I'm sorry, I don't want to jump in.
I did have just 2 quick ones, Kelly, if you don't mind.
No,
I wonder if we have a threshold that we ask our buildings to achieve. In other words, do we currently already identify across counselors, social workers, psychologists, community school coordinators that at a minimum every building has someone already, or are we in some respects literally going to have to start from scratch in certain buildings? That's my first question. And then secondly, sort of given where we are when you look at ratio to, sort of current norm, and realizing that we've got a long way to go, are we being thoughtful in how aggressive we are in terms of movement in this area, sort of juxtaposed against the clear lack of support we have to really actualize this in a way that allows us to move the needle significantly?
I can try and answer some of the first question, the starting from scratch question, Terry. We, as part of this integrated services team, we've kind of done a look across the district at every building. What do you like, kind of who are the people in your neighborhood? Do you have a success worker? Do you have a community school worker? What would be the minimum staffing that we would say is equitable for all buildings? So we have been doing that resource mapping. And there are buildings where those supports don't exist. And so that's part of our work as a team, has been saying, what are we going to say is the minimum for everybody to be able to have? So that work and kind of looking at those numbers has started. And one of the things that I keep coming back to around this, when I think about particularly school psychologists, that we know that there's a national shortage of school psychologists. And so Student and Family Services Department has worked closely with our Human Resources Department to do some really intentional reach outs to different national organizations, to be present at conferences, to do some recruiting in more intentional ways. And we are starting to see some of the benefits of that work. So again, I think when we are clear as a system about if this is where we're wanting to go with this model, then when we look at hiring, when we look at positions being revisited or perhaps repurposed, if everybody is on the same page about knowing that this is where we're trying to get to, I'm hopeful that that we will get there eventually. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Yeah, somewhat. Thank you.
All right, so this is Kelly, and I just have a few questions. So Laura, you had mentioned that in your mapping, you found that there were some buildings that don't have those supports. Roughly how many buildings are we saying that may be?
I honestly, Kelly, would hate to speak outside of that document being in front of my face. Few buildings don't have, I would just say that it's probably our smaller buildings that we're talking about. So I would say a handful. Jake, I don't know what you would, I just don't have that in front of me.
Yeah, I think in general, there's just a few positions we're talking about here. Every school has access. Every school has a school counselor. There are a few schools that have not good ratios, maybe 1 to 800 or 1 to 600 or something like that. And Laura, I don't want to misspeak either, but I believe every school has access, at least some portion of a social worker. It really, when it comes down to psychologists and community schools, that you can see that we are only in 21 buildings in community schools. So roughly, a little over, 33% of schools have that position where they're connecting those resources from the community schools lens. And then psychologists, I believe, is much fewer than that. And we have, over time in the integrated services in the past, those positions have been narrowed based on funding stream by siloed work. And so that's part of this work as well in the MTSS structure, is to break down those silos and allow folks to do the work across the district. So one example of that would be, is we're examining the community school coordinator position up next side of a success case manager. Between those two positions, we actually do have a staff member in every school. And so how can those teams work better together to ensure that we're meeting the needs of our families across the district?
Okay. Another question I have on slide 17, that's looking at next fiscal year. Are you anticipating that those numbers that you are, hiring additional workers to bring the ratios down to that level? So that's in the works and the plans to hire those additional positions?
Yeah, we have made those requests for positions and they've been approved. So that's what, if we can find the folks, that's what the ratios would be.
Okay. And then just quick, my last question is it possible to get a copy of Castle's report? Is it available online?
Yes, we can certainly share that.
Okay.
Just getting it to Aaron.
Yeah.
I think so. All right.
Okay.
Thank you. That's all I had. Thank you.
Yep. And just so you know, we did just receive that on Friday. So you are just outside of that, about 72 hours. So I'm going to oh, you have a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. Kaylin Cody here. I have, well, I guess it's two questions, but they're related. You mentioned I think it was in, I can't remember which section it was. You talked about the importance of planning time to get this right. And then we also talked about the need for professional development to get all the adults on board. So I guess in regards to planning time, has there been, I don't know, district guidance or some, have you been talking with schools about how to work that in, I guess is my question. And then in terms of the professional development, again, particularly with those elementary teachers, they're going to be swamped with reading and math and this, is there a reasonable timeline and schedule to get this all in?
So and I'll talk about the PD side, and as far as the scheduling piece, I'll let somebody else discuss that. As far as the PD side, that's the function that MTSS team is working on right now. We actually have a due date for 2 weeks, actually a week from Thursday, that we're going to come to the table and say, how are we delivering professional development to the whole district over these large levers that we feel are going to help us reach these goals? You know, how are we organizing that? We've also looked at, and so that will be, that sounds simple, I guess, when I say that, but you know, for a large organization, it can be very difficult. So we are excited about that opportunity to come together on the same page around PD and making sure that we are aligned in when folks are going to be out of buildings and what that looks like. In addition, I think you know, all the stakeholders that come together to make up that PD calendar, we've increased the time and supports for all different areas, the building level and the same as teachers and the district level support. So very optimistic about how we can get the professional development done in the next years as that team, MTSS team, is really finding its way to organizing that district-wide.
So this is Terry. I just had one other quick question. So I'm going to go back to my earlier question about the level of staff that either we need or possibly currently exist within the district to at least create the groundswell, if you will, for us to really, you know, launch this in a way that allows us to get some steam going. And I think you mentioned doing some asset mapping to really identify inventory that currently exists across not all of the areas, but several of the areas identified as being critical to sort of our program. And I think it would be helpful at some point for us maybe just to see overall in the district where we think those assets are, what the numbers look like. I mean, you sort of likened a community and schools worker or a success worker or something like that to one of the staffing levels that may sort of align. And maybe at least, and I know that you showed us sort of the 1 to 500 or 400 or whatever the data was earlier, but maybe just getting a better sense of the universe might give me a feeling that we at least have a good starting point. I'm feeling a little nervous about, you know, really being able to implement this in a way that allows us to utilize it in the manner it was intended if we don't really have the support to do it. So I think maybe if you even take what our current assets are and help us understand sort of how they line up might be helpful. And I don't know that this particular ratio is exactly what you were talking about relative to the identification of our existing assets, because I feel like there likely are some people that could be added on that may give us a little more, but I don't know.
Terry, you're right about that. Sorry, Jake, I didn't mean to cut you off. This is just from that national guide that Jacob referenced earlier. We do have other positions in our district that aren't on this slide, obviously, that are represented. And I do think that, you know, that is the work this integrated services team has done, is looked at behavior coaches, behavior strategists. Like when Tom referenced adding people to help with tiers 2 and 3, we have done that over time. So it is revisiting that in a way that we could be a little bit more sturdy in meeting some of these foundational ratio requirements. So there are other people, other roles that aren't represented in this. So yes, you're right about that. If that makes you feel less despair about the ratio and the numbers.
And I think we could provide what you're asking for. We do have a very robust spreadsheet that gives us where we've been working from to help make these changes. And I think Laura gave a perfect example. So with the lack of social workers that we've had historically, we've kind of started to supplement the work they could do by adding in different positions across the district. And so and the behavior strategists or coaches or things like that are examples of where a social worker, if implemented at a ratio as recommended, would be able to provide that level of support. And so since we were out of ratio, we started supplementing that. So now we're re-examining those roles and saying, okay, in these cases, should we have a social worker ratio instead of these supplemental positions? And those are the tough questions that we're discussing right now on that team.
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful. I feel like we're putting so much emphasis on this work as really being a large part of our ability to meet all of our goals, that really understanding sort of how we intend to fully implement this relative to the assets we have to put towards it, I think, is a really important part of the equation.
Absolutely. Okay, I'm going to jump ahead to just a couple more slides for updates, and then we'll have a few more minutes at the end to wrap it up. So the third limitation here was without the professional development plan. We have met several times. The crisis has been difficult for our teams to meet. However, it has actually allowed for folks to meet via video chat and have some recommendations and moving forward on this. So we have some pretty good ideas and have made some progress as well in this last couple of weeks. So specifically, we do have a project team that's been working on the professional development plan. It's been working solely focused on what do staff need, looking at the recommendations from Castle, which you will get that report. But even at Castle's district-wide plan, step one is kind of the vision, and step two is educating the adults around SEL. So that is really our focus. We've been looking at how much time we should be spending with adults, with who. So starting with central office staff, the board, and then moving our way to support folks to building administration. What we're very aware of and what Castle has repeated to us multiple times is don't go to the classroom so fast. Focus on the adults that are going to be organizing the system. Focus on the adults that are going to be supporting the system. Too often in their work, they've seen schools and districts jump right to the integration at the classroom level, and those that are making decisions to support it in the MTSS structure don't understand it and make lots of mistakes. And so they have overemphasized to us, stay with the adults, work with the adults until we see growth and fidelity in those foundational skills, and then look at integration. So that's where we've been focusing our year one professional development plan. We've been looking at the survey data that's come back from Panorama as a guide for that, in addition to the Q12 survey, the Gallup poll survey that we take with staff, and then again, the Castle recommendations. For adults specifically, we've had an opportunity that next week, actually, we're going to be providing some foundational knowledge to all staff members through this crisis. We've been able to have some time to build some PD modules for folks that they can self-explore. So our plan actually over the next 3 weeks is introduce some foundational learning around SEL for adults, with the first week being focused on just SEL Foundations 101. What is it? What are the 5 competency areas? What does that look like? And the week 2 would be focusing on self-assessment, looking at how folks are using the data that came from Panorama to assess their own skills, their own connections to that work. And then the third week, we were going to introduce kind of the 3 signature practices that Castle recommends. And throughout those 3 weeks, we are showing and connecting the work of SEL through equity, as is a very strong connection between equity and SEL and how folks are doing self-work and moving towards more equitable outcomes. So that has provided an opportunity for us to get started, and knowing that we'll be working on fiscal year 21 as we plan that out. And again, part of that PD, again, that we're working on is aligning and those integration of competencies over time. For the limitation number 4, with the social emotional curriculum, we have pulled together a curriculum team, which we'll talk about here in a second and what that looks like. We wanted to make a connection between the academic side of the house and the way that the curriculum is defined in these bullets on the left, to how in social emotional, how we would also define that so that we can see the connection and integration of these topics. What we're seeing here is on the left-hand side with academics, we may call those standard skills or learning targets, and we would define those on the social emotional right-hand side as competencies, progressions, and skills. The reason that we're making this comparison is to show that we are going to have to lay out a scope and sequence that's pre-K-12 that we would then integrate into academics. And so we're making this connection strongly so that we're using the similar language, and folks can see that yes, there are units and lessons in academics, just as there are themes and long-term growth projects in social emotional learning, that there are instructional resources that support academics, just like there are instructional practices, research-based practices, and modeling of behavior that support long-term social emotional development. So we just wanted to make that connection that we are working on those definitions, and we are aligning very tightly from the beginning with our academic partners. We do have a project team, as I mentioned. We met actually this morning and went over a few things. We are working on delivering some guidance to schools who are wanting to purchase materials by June 1st. Our goal is to deliver some rails to schools so that they have an idea of what curriculum materials we would be supporting as a district. If you've had a chance to look at the CASEL website, if you go on there, they evaluate programs. There are dozens and dozens of programs, and they're organized in elementary to secondary that they've evaluated those programs and those resources. And so we are using that as a jumping off point. And we are looking at those resources which ones would be the highest yield for Des Moines. We've also started to do an inventory of what resources are we currently using, and having the folks that are using those resources kind of report back to this project team about how they're doing, how is it working, how they like the resources, are they promoting the mission and vision of Des Moines, and you know, what are the strengths and weaknesses of each one of those materials. And again, our goal is to provide guidance to schools by June 1st, and I believe with the progress we made this morning, and we have another follow-up next week, we'll be able to do that. Another thing that ask that we'll be bringing to our MCSS team, but also just recognize here for the board, is that we really do feel at the central office level, we need a coordinator for social emotional learning, somebody that is not only looking at development of social emotional learning K-12, you know, or pre-K-12, you know, looking at that scope and sequence, looking at the curriculum, but also ensuring that the plan, the SEL strategic plan, is moving forward. Laura and I both, again, have full-time jobs that we're monitoring it as well at the system level, and we feel that the support around this would be crucial. We do, again, want to be able to build a standalone scope and sequence that integrates with academics. And the complexities around social emotional learning, when we think about 21st century skills along with college and career readiness, become very complicated at that 5th grade through 12th grade level, and how those things work together. So we're working towards getting an SEL coordinator, as we feel like that would really help propel this project forward. Number 5, our last update here is on the implementation of the assessment tool. As you're aware, we've used Panorama as our partner. We've asked those different survey questions in these highlighted blue categories, reminding you that we did add school safety to the support section. In addition, we did ask the SEL readiness questions for staff on the far right as well. We just closed our window, and those results for our second assessment should be back to us within this week or early next week. We'll be able to have those results back. We were able to get that assessment finished just prior to spring break, and prior for us not coming back to the physical plant school. Again, this review of the topics on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, there are the details of the assessment. We were able to assess students that were K-12. At the same time, these are the assessment windows. We just finished again. And then again, we did survey all staff across the district that were assigned to a school. So we have that feedback, which is a huge for us in deciding how and monitoring how we move forward. And that was it. Those are updates of the limitations. Were there any other questions as we finish that presentation?
Board members, what other questions do you have?
So I know being out of school for these last few weeks and then going forward likely will have some impact on implementation strategy and schedule. So can you talk a little bit about sort of what Plan B is and how you intend to execute on plan, sort of based on our new normal and our highly revised mode of engagement?
That was eloquently stated, Terry. I just have to editorialize a minute there.
And I can jump in, and Laura, feel free to correct. I believe right now we are still in that planning and building stage. So if in our current normal, the limitations have been minor for our engagement, we've been able to still engage with staff. It's been technically difficult at times. It has delayed some meetings, but hasn't delayed us where I don't feel like we can deliver to you what we've talked about as a plan. That's a overarching implementation plan that aligns to CASEL that we've got from. What I am concerned about and what Laura and I have discussed is what professional development looks like, and knowing that we need to be, should be looking at professional development this summer. How will we be delayed, and what will that new learning look like if we are not able to be back at physical plant space? And so those things we've started to consider. Our partners in this work, Castle, Panorama, and other partners have been very, very helpful with us in providing different types of ways that we can engage with them. And so we're exploring those currently. But I can't predict the future of that, Terry, but we feel a little bit lucky regarding that we're still in the planning phase. The implementation phase is getting ready to start here shortly, so it may change the modality in which we start to learn and develop adults.
Thank you.
Any other board member questions?
Yes. So this is Kelly. I have a few questions. Just for clarification purposes, you had on the curriculum slide, which is slide 24, no, I'm sorry, slide 25. It talked about, you talked about having plans with buildings in place for purchasing materials by June 1, I believe. So help me understand, because I believe, or I thought you had mentioned at the beginning of the presentation how one of the challenges is our buildings are autonomous, and so sometimes it feels like everybody's kind of going a different direction. And so is this a kind of solidifying that and supporting that, or how will this all come together if if buildings are allowed to do, obviously it makes sense what's maybe best for them, but if we're going in different directions, is that what we're looking to do, or is there somehow going to be a streamline in this?
And I think when Jake was talking about the curriculum work group, that's sort of a subset of our larger SEL work team. That's why they're working on that. What are some Castle recommended supports and materials, because we know that people are doing it right now. I mean, that was reflected in the Castle report. And so we want to be able to just provide some guardrails to them that if you're going to move forward with this, then these are the resources that the district would support at this time. Because it is difficult because buildings are at different places. And so we want to be able to support in an intentional way their efforts while still giving the same message that our overall plan is focusing on adults first. Because I think part of that messaging, we haven't had the opportunity to be clear about that yet.
Okay. And I mean, are we going to somehow keep ourselves connected and not different buildings going off on down different paths that may get us all lost? I guess that's my concern, is it sometimes feels like there is so much autonomy, but that sometimes that's not always as effective.
And again, I think we could use our MTSS team as a way to coordinate that better, because I think again, I think that's a well-founded concern, and I'm hopeful that structure that is set up through that MTSS leadership team will provide some stability around that, so we aren't going in multiple directions, Kelly.
Okay.
And to your point, Kelly, I just want to add is that what the first step isn't providing guidance on research purchasing. You're correct on that. The recommendation from Castle was, hey, folks are buying things and doing things, and some schools are progressing very, very well in implementing SEL. And so we don't want to stop that progression. So their recommendation to us was provide some guardrails so folks aren't going in places and spending dollars, but also, make sure that they're buying high quality resources. We should at first, and the things that will actually anchor us, I think that you're getting at, is those competencies that we are going to adopt as a district. What are the competencies across grade levels and banded that we can then anchor to and tie research-based practices and provide resources and materials to help support schools reaching those. So once that's really what should happen first, but we just know that we're in a position that guidance needs to come out first, and then we will need to work on adopting those competencies. K-12 in Iowa, as you may be aware, is already written banded competencies pre-K-12, and so those are places that we're obviously going to be starting.
Okay. A second question I had around professional development, you addressed that you had some time to start working on PD, some online opportunities. And so you're looking at possibly starting some implementation next week and kind of progressing that through. And I'm curious as to what level of support is being provided to instructional coaches and or mentors for our staff to, one of the things that I'm continually harping on and continually monitoring is the need for strong supervision to help in that continual learning for individuals and for professionals. So I'm not sure if there's any kind of concerted effort around being intentional with, providing that level of support so that it can trickle down into the staff.
Yeah, for this next week, we are building modules as introductory for all staff. Laura and I have discussed on the infrastructure piece. It was what I believe you're getting to is how are we going to provide infrastructure, whether that's internal, external coaching to allow folks to continue to implement with fidelity. That is a piece that we're working through, not only with that integrated services team, but also with that MTSS team in terms of who does what and how do these systems get built so that we can ensure that that this program as we move forward has become successful. So next week really is foundational learning for all staff, and then the future state as us building infrastructure to support that learning.
Okay. And just my last question, or rather maybe editorial commentary here, has to do around just everything that we're experiencing right now with COVID and where our kids are at and the crisis mode that we are all in. But just with a greater understanding of when our kids come back to us, whenever that is, it's going to look different. It's not going to be like it is today or when they went on spring break. And so just for us to be cognizant and aware that approaches may even look different, interventions may look different. And so not sure whether or not you guys, as you're talking through implementation of SEL plans in the district in relationship to where we were prior to COVID, but that's going to be some added, I think just some added measures for us to consider of how our kids are going to come back into our classrooms. So I make that point, like I said, maybe commentary. I don't know if there's anything you could share if you've had conversations with Castle specific around being prepared and ready for when that comes. So I kind of open that up if you have any comments or thoughts on that.
No, I appreciate your comments, Kelly. And last Friday when we were talking to them, we did talk a little bit about the very point that you just made, is that this has really changed the landscape. And when we're talking about SEL, everybody's lives have been really turned upside down, and what are the implications for this work? And so our next steps with them are to be able to get a little bit more information from them about their recommendations. They did follow up and sent us a bunch of resources that they've put together specifically around COVID and supporting students and families during this time. And then, like you said, when everybody returns, because it will be a different type of normal for everybody. So I'm pleased that we have that relationship with Castle, because I think that they're kind of like ahead of us in that regard. So we can take advantage of that.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other board member questions before I jump in?
Actually, can I just make a quick request?
Of course, Rob.
I know there's you mentioned managing rollout of everything. Maybe I'll email my question into Tom. How about that?
No, you're fine, Rob. Go ahead.
Tom, at some point in time, could you get us a graphic or a chart or something that just kind of lays out what we are doing in terms of rollouts of initiatives? Because in my mind, when we did the last elementary literacy report, we're in the process of rolling out a new elementary literacy curriculum. We have new math curriculum coming. And I think it's just helpful to see all of that together as a board so that we're cognitive, we know what's happening and when it's happening, because I think that helps us when we're hit with the inevitable questions about, things landing on top of other things.
Sure, absolutely, we can do that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Rob, thanks for asking that question because I had jotted down something similar. So thanks for doing that.
No problem.
I'm curious how you taught Javi the COVID-19 blues so quickly.
For the record, that was 2-year-old Mirabelle on the harmonica.
Oh, that was Mirabelle. Wow.
Yeah. We
Nice.
start him young in this household.
Any other board members before I jump in? Okay, I just have two other questions, and I think this kind of piggybacks off of what Kelly asked a little bit, but are we currently providing or planning to provide any SEL supports at home that will go out as part of the curriculum to parents over the next couple weeks, or?
Yeah, this is Jake. I can jump in here on that. So I think we do, or we have planning to do that around in that caregiver section. I don't know if you've seen how the electronic resources are going to be rolled out or not, but there is a section there of resources for caregivers. We've already provided quite a few supports on that COVID-19 website regarding the SAP supports or some mental health supports and behavioral health supports as pieces as well. So what we've done is we've reached out, and I've reached out to school counselors to ask them to kind of work together on creating resources for K-5, 6, 6, 9, or 6, 8, and 9, 12 resources for families. And we're just going to make sure to strike a very a good balance here, is that we don't actually have an adopted scope and sequence K-12. So it's hard for us to send home things that tie to that. We can tie to the competencies. So the resources that we do want to be sending home are things that helps that are good for all families and students to be using, that are age appropriate, to help them not only manage some of the emotions that are currently happening, but we've thought about some sentence starters or things for folks to help have that communication going on in the family. We certainly aren't trying to address and move skills at this point in time, but try to address the dynamics and the feelings and the emotional affect that's occurring within the home. So those are the things that we will have available. Our projection right now, I just met with that lead team today, is that we'll have some of those resources ready to go by the beginning of next week. And I believe we'll be putting those out somewhere around the 20th or the 27th. I'm not sure exactly what date those will actually go live. But we're working on that right now. From the school counselors are pulling that together.
Awesome. I know that that's really appreciated, because I know, even as adults right now, it seems like in my conversations, we're all struggling to kind of put words to this. So I think the supports we can provide for families during this time that I know is especially hard. I've been watching, a number of parents, commenting on just how different this is than, even my teacher friends in the summer months when they have their kids home all summer. So, and then you had mentioned professional development for board members. What were you kind of thinking that might look like, and that sort of thing?
Well, I think that's a really good question, because we would be really open to hearing what it is that you would like to hear about. We want to be able to provide, obviously, the information about what we're doing district-wide, but also just for your own learning needs. And that would be really helpful for us to get some of your feedback about what it is that would be most beneficial given the time constraints that we probably would have with you.
Okay. I think then what it might make sense, Dr. Ahart, is that we spend some time at agenda planning and kind of think of some potential topics, and then also gather some ideas from the board on what we might be interested in learning more about. Does that make sense, Dr. Ahart and board?
It sure does to me.
Okay.
I will add in there one topic that we have available for right now is from Panorama to do a webinar series with the board whenever that would be convenient. They have about an hour to 90 minutes planned to make sure that you have a high level understanding of the data that's collected from students, so that we can appropriately set goals. So that's available when the board would like to engage in that with them.
Okay, thank you for that reminder, Jake. I do remember we had tried to get that scheduled, and I think we got it scheduled for caucus night, and that just wasn't a good time for folks, unless that was different work. But we can talk tomorrow night about when we might want to try to, or we can talk during agenda planning tomorrow about when we might want to calendar that.
Yep, no problem. They're very flexible to do that webinar when it makes sense. We wanted to get to make sure that we were also, Laura and I discussed wanting to make sure that you had the information to appropriately set goals as we start to monitor forward.
Okay, thank you. Board members, I kind of did this a little bit backwards. I forgot to get our motion in second before we opened this up completely for discussion. So I guess I'm just going to let us continue our discussion before taking a motion. Does anyone else have any other questions or discussion before I take a motion to accept our report this evening? All right, then I would entertain a motion in a second.
This is Terry, move approval.
This is
I
Kelly.
second it.
I think I have a motion from Caldwell Johnson and a second from Sawyer. Any further discussion or questions? Okay, Erin, if you could please take our roll call vote.
Absolutely. Anderson,
Yes.
Barron,
Yes.
Bradley,
Yes.
Caldwell Johnson, Cody,
Yes.
Delagardelle,
Yes.
and Sawyer.
Yes.
Terry, did you want to vote yes on your motion?
I apologize, I was on mute. Yes.
Great. Motion carries 7-0. We don't have any information only items this evening, and so next on our agenda are items of privilege, and I do just have some reflections and a statement that I would like to share now with the board. The last several weeks have given me the opportunity to reflect on leadership while making tough decisions. I've seen our DMPS staff, our teachers, associates, bus drivers, custodians, administrative assistants, nurses, other school staff, and administrators working to support our Des Moines families, students, and each other. Our food service staff served 7,000 meals just today, with a total of over 125,000 meals since last Monday, and will serve thousands more in the weeks to come. Our staff are working to problem solve to get devices and connectivity to our students during this time. This work is not easy, and they are doing it every day while constantly thinking about our students. Our nurses have been assisting families and staffing the Polk County 211 line in order to assist with connecting those in need with resources. I've seen truly amazing work over the last couple weeks from our DMPS staff. I've heard from community members, teachers and staff, parents and students during this time. Thank you so much for staying engaged. I thank my board colleagues for their support and constant attention to our community. I'm proud to serve alongside you and work to keep our students and our community's values at the heart of all of our decisions. Our students deserve the best, and I'm grateful for the care and thoughtfulness I know you put into your decisions, questions, and discussion. Dr. Ahart, thank you for making decisions to best protect our students, staff, and their families. It's important during these times that we continue to build trust with our community and keep each of our unique groups of students in our minds and hearts. Thank you for also being mindful of what is best for students and fair to staff and teachers. This brings me to another reflection on leadership. Sometimes it's difficult to please all constituencies. I'm so proud of Des Moines Public Schools for not being afraid at this time to move forward to make decisions over what we can best control, the closing or opening of our school buildings in order to protect the health of our students, staff, and community. Over 44,000 people from across the metro are in our schools on a daily basis. While the days ahead are fraught with uncertainty and fear, new and unique challenges, it is comforting to know that I sit alongside a board and staff with strength and resolve to make what could be unpopular decisions across the state. We do know our constituency, though. Our most important and only priority is and will remain the care and education of our students and the safety and well-being of all who enter our buildings. In a time when people are looking for leadership, I'm proud to stand with this team at this time. There will certainly be difficult days and decisions ahead, but we will continue to do what we have always done and will do for many years into the future, serve the students of Des Moines. I just really wanted to make those comments to ensure that I think just to remind myself and our board of where our work is truly grounded and where our work is in a time when we're looking for leadership and potentially not seeing it from our state. So Board members, do you have any other comments or announcements that you want to share? Heather, I did see that we had a legislative coffee this weekend that I know is not happening, but I thought that was an interesting thing to see on my calendar during this time.
Oh, that's funny. I think we forgot to cancel that.
I'm sure our community will recognize that it's canceled without legislation in session and our
Yeah, shoot. I'll get that canceled officially, but yeah, it's a bummer.
yeah.
Hey, Kirsten, this is Terry, and just a couple of things. I appreciate your statement. I think it really lifts up not only the leadership that's been demonstrated by Dr. Ahart and his staff, but I think it also reflects the support that he has from this board to make the hard choices that need to be made in the best interest of our students. So thank you for sharing that. I would also like to maybe prompt us as a board, while I know that there are a lot of things happening around us that we don't have control over, there are a lot of things that we do have control over, and that's our own agenda. There are things that I think we put on the back burner thinking that we wouldn't be in this for very long and we'd be in a position to move forward much more quickly than we have been able to. So I would really like for our board leadership to consider two things that I think are imminent. The first of those is completing our superintendent evaluation, which I know we put on hold thinking that being able to do it face-to-face would be optimal. That obviously is not going to happen now. So I'd like for us to just move forward with that. And then I also would like for us to spend some time thinking about the stadium proposal and our task force that we had originally identified as wanting to put together. This is a great time for us to really be thinking through and thinking about the appointees to that, maybe even reaching out to individuals once we have agreed on who the task force members would be that the board is assigned to appoint, so that when time is available and ready for us to, be able to see each other face to face without having to socially distance, we'll be ready to hit the ground running. I think our community deserves an answer on that, needs to understand where we are as a board on that. And I think this just allows us time to not only take advantage of some time that we have on our hands, but really to begin to move forward. So those are the two things that I'd really like for us to focus our attention on. Those are the things that we can indeed control.
Yes, I appreciate that, Terry. I actually have that slated as part of our work session following the board meeting to get us back on track with our schedule for our board work moving forward. So thank you for raising those up.
Thank you.
Any other board member comments before I turn this over to Dr. Ahart?
So yeah, this is Kelly. Really quick, I would just first off, Kirsten, thank you for those comments. Very well put, a lot better than what I could have done just off the cuff. So I appreciate your comments. But just to share with my colleagues as well, on Monday, well, gosh, yesterday, we're Tuesday now. Yesterday, I did take the opportunity to go to one of our sites that's handing out the meals to participate and share my time. And it was a really valuable experience. And I'm going back this Friday, and I anticipate getting there as many times as I possibly can, because those are our staff that are manning those sites right now. And so definitely, if there's opportunity, if you are able to, I would encourage you to do it. But it's also just nice to connect with families and students when they're showing up. I mean, just little basic things at the site I was at, when we were handing out the homework packets, students came out and were like, well, I don't have a pencil. So, I mean, little things we weren't even thinking of what some needs are in the home. So I valued that experience yesterday, and glad I'm going to be able to continue that moving forward.
Thank you, Kelly. And we'd actually talked with Dr. Ahart about that today, and he had said he would get board members additional information about those types of opportunities. So, all right, Dr. Ahart, I'll turn it over for your report.
All right, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for jumping onto Teams, which is going to be our new platform for board meetings, I'm afraid. I'm finding it interesting to juggle board docs and Teams on the same device, but everyone seems to be handling that pretty smoothly. I just can't say enough about the efforts of our staff, literally in every department, where what we're asking of everyone is different than anything they had anticipated. And in some cases, like the food distribution and some other, getting into buildings and cleaning, people are taking a risk, getting in the space of others. We're obviously following all of the precautions, but the virus is about us at a way higher level than any of the data can currently portray, because we're still severely under testing. And I've just been tremendously proud of our entire staff, and how they've stepped up, how they're rolling with the punches in this time of it seems like increasing uncertainty, especially as we are forging ahead in one direction and the state may be forging ahead in another. I'm hopeful that the state will come around, and we won't be forging this one alone, but we're certainly prepared to do that, and I'm confident that in the decisions that we've made thus far. And I think that where we are right now speaks volumes about the leadership of the DMPS Board of Directors. Certainly, you're grounded in your values and aligned with the team. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. And especially in this circumstance, this is one of those times when it really tests where we are in that relationship and where how well our values are aligned. And I think that we've spoken very, very loudly and clearly to our community, and we're making a difference, I'm confident, way beyond the 33,000 students and 5,000 staff. I've gotten so much feedback from folks across the state, and folks in this community that don't have a direct tie to the district. And that's something I think of which we can all be proud. And I think we need to remember this as other small, perhaps hopefully smaller dimension crises have to be faced by us as a team, knowing that we're getting through this in an exemplary way. And I think it just lays a really even more solid foundation for all the work that we have in front of us: SEL, SMART goals, etc. You all received a draft earlier today, not that much earlier today, of a statement that we hope to release to the media. We likely at this hour won't do this until the morning, and we'll also send this out to our families and staff, of course. And there will be much more detail for families coming from the building level and from teachers. And I didn't add this to the SEL report, but there was some questions about how is it that we're going to serve our students in regards to SEL. And we will do some formal things, provide some research and some resources and so forth, and that's important. But I think the most important thing we're going to do is provide the opportunity for our students to regularly and frequently connect with those with whom they're most familiar, some of the adults in their lives that are most familiar, that they've been leaning on for the last 7 months of the school year, and rekindling those relationships and having regular conversations with those teachers and counselors and others on our team that really have become part of their family for this academic year. There's grieving going on right now, and a tremendous amount of stress, especially for certain of our students who have a higher level of stress day to day anyway. And this just throws things to a much larger magnitude. And that's really probably been the toughest thing for our entire team, is being separated from our students, knowing what we want to do for them, and continuing to cultivate those relationships that our staff so caringly develops over the course of a year. So I'm really excited about the direction that we're headed, and I think come May and come June, it'll be very evident to everyone who may not be convinced right now that we're absolutely taking the right course forward for the long-term stability of our students, and certainly for continuing their learning through this COVID-19 crisis that we're all trying to endure together. We spoke together the last time on Thursday, and we heard from Dr. Shaw, and I think we all had consensus about the path forward. We had already, I think I had shared with you on Thursday, we had already made the decision as a team that this is really where we needed to focus our energy, because it's an extremely heavy lift. I spent a good portion of the day today negotiating with some service providers, and attempting to start the ball rolling on hopefully some private contributions to help support the significant additional investment that it will take for us to get a device in every student's hands, and to get internet access for all of our students who currently do not have it. We're making some very good headway. This is a very complicated equation on the connectivity part. The device piece is a challenge, but something for which we have the resources largely in place, but it's a matter of safely distributing, which just that physical distribution is a challenge when we're trying to limit contact between individuals and trying to limit traffic in our buildings and so forth. So that piece we have well underway. We have surveyed all of our seniors, and we have results back from over 90% of our seniors. Those that we've not heard back from, we are very persistent about figuring out how to locate them. We're relegated to phone numbers sometimes, and sometimes those phone numbers change. And so we'll continue. We're pretty good at tracking down students that we can't find. So the handful that we have left, will be very persistent and continue to reach out to make sure that we've made connection with them and understand their current context, and make sure that they have what they need to continue learning. So as I told you several weeks ago, it's not several weeks ago, it seems like a year ago, a couple of weeks ago, our first concern when we knew that there was going to be some interruption in educational services was for our seniors, because whatever happens, we don't expect them to be coming back next year to finish off a few months of school. So we're further ahead with our seniors, because it's very necessary that we do all we can for them, as well as the underclassmen who are taking AP classes, because those tests will still roll around this spring. So we don't want any of our students to be at a disadvantage in that regard. So the plan right now is, and I have some other folks on the line here who can speak to with a little more intricate detail on some of the details of this. But the plan is that we will distribute computers and or internet connections to our high school seniors this week. Most of that happening on Friday, with coursework actually beginning on Monday the 13th. And then and we're in the process right now of surveying the rest of our student body. We have a little over 20,000 households, and so some of the work that we accomplished with seniors will serve some of the underclassmen who have a sibling who's a senior in their household, and we'll have that same duplication with some of the other groups. But we plan to do distance learning beginning on Monday the 20th, which is a week from Monday, or 2 weeks from yesterday, with the rest of our high school students. And then beginning Monday, April 27th, distance learning for our pre-K 8 students. That will leave us about 5 weeks in the school year in which we can focus not exclusively, but have a higher focus on English language arts, including reading and math, but we will also be providing coursework in the hard sciences, social science, all of the humanities, etc. We've just upgraded the resources that we have available to families on the website, and Kelly may have seen that we're distributing printed materials for families that want them as part of our food distribution protocol. By the way, I reminded me, please, that I want to just update you a little bit on plans for distributing meals moving forward. Our teachers, we had already, even during the already scheduled professional learning opportunities that we had at the tail end of spring break, we had already started to address some distance learning professional development for staff. We're putting that on steroids right now. It will look different at different grade levels for sure, but certainly with the exception of our virtual campus teachers, we really don't have, by and large, any staff who are trained or experienced in connecting with their students virtually for an extended period of time. And so we have training in place for that. We'll have ongoing support, of course. Thankfully, we've made I think some smart investments in software products, most notably Canvas, so that we actually have a vehicle, an electronic vehicle for facilitating the connection between students and staff, and to house materials and lesson plans and assignments, and collecting those electronically, exchanging them, and interacting from a distance. As I said before, we will be communicating with much greater detail to students and parents in the coming days, focusing initially with those families that have seniors in their household, and then immediately following with high school underclassmen, middle school, and then elementary. I want to recognize publicly that while this is a really heavy lift for our team, and we're moving with pretty amazing speed in getting this off the ground, it is no less of a burden, or no more of a burden for us than certainly it is for our families. And we certainly recognize that. And that, frankly, was the hardest part about making the decision to not bring students back for the remainder of the year. All of our families have a different level of capability and capacity and resources to draw from, and we certainly recognize that. So it will not just be our teachers who are engaged in this work. It'll be our regular classroom teachers and content area teachers, but it'll be our bilingual family liaisons. It will be our ELL teachers, our special education teachers, and our counselors. It's really all hands on deck, and all of us are actively trying to figure out, okay, what does my work look like now? And where are the best access points for me to make my contribution to ensure that every student feels supported, feels connected, and can continue their learning in as meaningful a way as we can, given this very dramatic and unanticipated change in our world. So, but with that, before I open for questions, I just wanted to mention that we have been, I mentioned to you on Thursday, which is why I want to loop back. We had some questions about essentially financing around our continued ability to provide food for our families. We distributed about 7,000 meals today, and it's I think somewhere around 140,000 meals that we've distributed since a week ago Monday. That number is steadily increasing. We anticipate, because we're continually reaching out to families to make sure that everybody is aware of the opportunities. So we anticipate getting that number up probably close to 10,000 in the coming weeks on a daily basis, and on weekends, which really equates to Friday. That means a distribution of about 30,000 meals in one day. Very heavy lift, the work of our food and nutrition team looks very different when they're preparing meals and distributing them in this manner. And we have been highly reliant on volunteers. A lot of those are staff members who have, from other areas, teachers, administrators who have volunteered to help with distribution. We don't think that that's a sustainable model, especially as we're asking more of our instructional staff to be more connected and consistently connected with our students once we have all of them electronically connected. So what we're planning on doing is dramatically expanding the number of sites at which we're distributing meals and employing a much larger number, or calling into service a much larger number of our existing food and nutrition staff. We think this will allow for a number of things. Number one, it'll allow for a more efficient distribution of the meals. If we do get up to somewhere near 10,000, cramming all of that distribution into 10 sites is just going to cause congestion and frustration. So I think it'll be a smoother and more time-effective investment in time for our families, especially. But it also allows us to, without causing congestion, to distribute other needed items, instructional materials and so forth, without causing a backup and traffic delays and frustrations for not only for our families, but also for anyone who's trying to traverse the areas around our schools when that is happening. Okay, so with that, I will entertain any questions or comments that you all might have, and I may call on Kelly Schofield or Matt Smith, or I think Noel Nelson is online with us too, that if there's any particulars that I can't answer with as much detail as you might like.
I had a comment. This is Heather. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry. Hey, I had a chance to look at the pre-K 8 subject workbooks that you pushed out, and they're just excellent. They have so many resources and learning opportunities for students, and I really think that the team did a great job on it. I just wanted to thank everyone for their hard work.
Oh, fantastic! Thank you so much for recognizing that, Heather.
I had a couple quick things. This is Rob. Tom, you and I emailed last night about Wi-Fi and internet connectivity in the city.
Yeah.
And my my thinking on this one for the last week or so has been that this is going to be a long-term thing that we need to address. And I think you and I are aligned on this, and I imagine there's unanimity on the board too, that once we get through crisis response and recovery, and we can start to take a bigger, longer view, we need to convene the right folks to have a conversation about making sure that we have good internet connectivity throughout our city, because this is exposing the fact that we do not. And I think we've known that, and there's been some rankings that have put us in the middle of the pack with cities our size. So I want to make sure that that's noted and that that's on the board's mind going forward. And I had one other thing, but if you wanted to say something, Tom, I'll yield to you.
Yeah, I do. I really appreciate that, Rob. This is one of those things, in many respects, not unlike, but on a sort of a grander scale, I guess, us taking what I would argue is the leadership role in the state in terms of organizational response to COVID-19. Rob and I had discussed, I don't know, Rob, it was 5 or 6 years ago, I think. I had been attempting to pursue with the partnership and with the state public policy group and some others, an initiative to try to get exactly what Rob had just shared. We really, I believe, are not following positive lessons that we should have learned in the history of our country. If you look at what happened when the telephone became, a scalable technology, there were real efforts to ensure that everybody, even in rural parts of the country, had a reliable connection, an affordable connection to the telephone. And frankly, I think you could argue that internet access is no less important today than the telephone was then. In some regards, it's more important. And we just do not think of it as a society as a basic utility. And I think that it's very clear that it ought to be treated as such. We do a tremendous, a high priority that we all take for granted, I think, largely, is that we have potable water easily available to everyone. And we have electricity easily available to everyone. We don't have that with the internet, and it is really a basic necessity in today's world, and that's COVID-19 aside. The estimate that we have now, and again, we're collecting this data right now, but it looks like my guess that about a third of our families don't have high-speed internet access at home is going to be pretty close to accurate. That's not acceptable, and that's not acceptable even if we weren't attempting to do online learning. I shared with some of you, maybe all of you, on Thursday, the discussions that we've had. I shouldn't say discussions, but the meetings that we've had with the Department of Education on distance learning and just guidelines for how we bridge the gap in services at schools during this closure has only shown a really bright spotlight on inequities in our communities. I think I shared with some of you that Van Meter School District, which serves between 700 and 800 students, has 4 students without high-speed internet access at home. Well, if that was our ratio, we wouldn't need to have this conversation. That's something we could easily take care of as a district and have that not be burdensome to everything else that we're attempting to do. But we're looking at possibly having to do 7,500 internet connections for our families so that we can engage in some form of online or virtual learning. But besides that, the ability of our families to stay connected to friends and relatives, especially those that have friends and relatives that live internationally, and we have a lot of those families. They can do that through the internet without it being a burden to them financially. The ability of our families to connect with employment resources, to engage in professional training and technical training, and the list goes on and on and on and on and on. So I really appreciate Rob's thinking on this. And once we are kind of through this, getting through the crisis mode, I would really appreciate the board adopting that as an area of priority in terms of linkage and in terms of advocacy with the city, with Polk County, and with all the other players that we think may be necessary to engage, and who, by the way, would also benefit from having a much more robust internet and robust and affordable internet infrastructure within the bounds of the district and the city.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, I think that nails it, and I think you're right. I think there's so many folks that would benefit from this. Thinking about a third of our students not having a reliable internet connection is really daunting right now. The other question I had is, we got the packet of work at our house, and Javi's already started on his. Can you just talk through what? So it's the 27th when K-8 will be online, and the 20th when secondary will be. What does that look like from a day-to-day perspective for families?
Yeah, can I ask Kelly to jump in here because she's been, especially at the K-8 level, has been integrally involved in this and really leading how that's going to play out in real time.
Yeah, sure. And Sarah Doherty's on here too. If you wanted to kind of get a glimpse at what it will look like, we can certainly show you the Canvas course, and she can run through that with you as well, if that's something that you'd like to see. Sarah and I have teamed up and to sort of plan and facilitate the K-8, pre-K-8 actually, learning structure that we've kind of rebranded as DMPS at home, because we wanted to really separate from all the other titles that are out there, like continuous learning or remote learning, of just what are we providing for our students when they're doing this home learning. So we've come up with the brand DMPS at home and worked with Phil's team on that. And that includes the digital resources, the print resources, which we will continue to keep doing even after the 27th. We're going to continue those print resources, and then moving into online learning that we will provide through Canvas. Now that will be, and I'm going to let Sarah talk a little bit more about that in a second and take you through it, but it will be learning opportunities that will focus on the essential standards that we cover throughout the year, of reviewing those essential standards, especially ELA and math, and focusing on some of the new ones that we maybe didn't hit in the fourth quarter. But I do want to say that we aren't intending this to take the place of the learning in the fourth quarter. And what I mean by that is we know that when we come back, the curriculum team is going to have to work to provide guidance and support for teachers to compact that learning that we didn't get to in the fourth quarter as we start this new school year. So we know that's coming, and know that this, because it is optional, and even if we give devices out and we have connectivity across the district, there's going to be a lot of other barriers that families have to interact with this learning. So we're focusing on that. We're not into, we do know that we'll have to have a plan going into next year. So there will be a variety of optional resources and learning opportunities, much like the printed materials, and it'll be paced out. So it'll come on to Canvas weekly, and it'll be intuitive. And again, Sarah will show, when she pulls that up, you'll get to see what that will look like. But families will be able to click on the resource ELA, math, science, social studies, and then that learning page will come up with some lessons that families can do throughout the week. So it won't be you have to log on to something at 9 o'clock, or you have to be somewhere at a certain time of day to access the learning. This will be consistent across the district. So you'll build these courses and they'll be pushed out to all teachers across the district so that it's consistent. And then we're going to work with orienting the teachers. So Sarah's got it pulled up here so you can see this is, I think, kindergarten, but big bright buttons comes up, and then the various reading, the subject areas are there. So there's not things in those right now because we're building them, but it'll be very similar to what you see with the print resources. We are using some of the topics of our EL curriculum to build that background knowledge for our K-5 students, so that we're able to still focus on the ideas that we know that are good for our students to learn when they're learning reading, and that's building that background knowledge and vocabulary. We're going to put out sample schedules for parents so they can interact with that learning and kind of guides for what self-paced might look like in the home. And then we'll work with teachers on orienting them on the course, but also then how can they connect with this learning with students at home, right? And building leaders. We've been talking to a variety of building leaders and talking about some of their thoughts and plans around that. And we'll have some minimum expectations from the district or some guidelines, and then really hoping that those building leaders can take that and they know their students and they know their teachers and come up with a plan for how teachers are going to interact with this curriculum materials with their students. It's kind of high level. Sarah, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I just want to double down. Dr. Ahart mentioned that our investment in a learning management system, while for alternative purposes when we began is going to pay off, and we're going to be able to expedite delivery of high quality materials via this platform while we're working on that access piece. So we actually have the advantage of being able to work on those strands at the same time. So when they come together, they can come together in the most timely way possible. And I also, thanks for your words about the curriculum team. I mean, we can put all these structures in place and we can get kids access, but it's a double-edged sword, as you know, and our curriculum team and a number of teacher leaders are working so diligently to make sure that not only do kids get the access, but what they're accessing is aligned and high quality and engaging and manageable in the ways that Kelly mentioned. So it's an amazing team effort, but we were well positioned in some ways, and in some ways, as we've already talked about, there are some gaps to fill.
Yeah, and when in talking to principals, they're really working with their staff to organize. Each staff member has things going on at home too, right? Some of them are working with young children at home. Some of them are juggling like one computer for two people trying to work. So they have some of those same things that our families do. So they're just trying. They really talked a lot about trying to manage that, giving access to teachers, but also understanding that teachers have to, that has to fit within their daily schedule, and then also being able to support families. So they're really working through a lot of that this week and talking to their teachers about what would work in your schedule, like what could we plan in your schedule, what days could you possibly be available to students across the school. So really, I have to say the leaders that we've been talking to, and Sarah can chime in, have really been putting a lot of thought into how they can support families the best they can without too much undue stress on their staff. Did that answer your question, Rob? That might have gone like all the way around, but
No,
we've
that
been
was
speaking so much about it in the last few days. So
that was really good. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just saying for me it's helpful to see it and just to kind of understand, because there's I don't know how this stuff works. I'm just a parent that's going to be trying to figure this out, and so when you say things like, well, we're going to transition to an online learning model, I'm like, gosh, what's that? How's that different from what I'm doing right now? Or and what that looks like for our family. So, and I think that's going to be the perspective that a lot of families are going to be in. So the more that you can do to whether it's videos or just things that can really break this down for our families, because I know I'm probably more plugged in than most in some regards. But this is still a learning experience for me as a father. So the more that you guys can do to make this relatable for folks, the better.
Yeah, those video resources for both families and for students as we get into middle school who may be accessing this more independently are underway. And the idea, to connect what Kelly had talked about, the idea that we could take this on for our building leaders and for our teachers so that they can make the space to make those connections like we talked about in that SEL report is really important. And so it's one way that we can divide up, which could be substantial labor, into manageable pieces that we know that we can, execute fully, so that teachers can do their most important job, which is to support kids through what can be, and families through what can be a pretty scary time. And part of that even is just technical, right? We don't want people to be spending energy getting frustrated around the technical aspects of how to provide their kids these learning resources. And so those are all really key components to our plan. Because again, if we make it great but can't access it, it still doesn't do its job.
Absolutely, and trying to look at those things around what we're always rooted in is equity, and so getting devices and internet access is one thing, but talking to families, I was talking to a principal today and just trying to problem solve around. They had a family that had 9 children, right? So there was just a lot of things to think about around that, right? So, we really are trying to take into account our most marginalized students, because when we want to say access, it's no different than when we're in school, right? We want all students to have access, and we're chipping away at it, and for a lot of us, it seems super slow to make sure that all of our students have access to like the print materials and different things. But it really is what drives us is how do we support families, all families, like you were saying, Rob, just to make it doable. But then how do we ensure that our most marginalized students are getting access to something? And then those check-in, check-outs are another thing that we just keep pushing with the schools of, that it can be around learning, but more importantly, do we know where our students are and are they okay, right? So having that check-in on a weekly basis, at least once a week, is more about their emotional health for the students right now. And then making sure that if we're not checking in with someone, that we can follow up with that. So having that regular routine, and principals they have got some great plans for doing that and dividing that up among their staff at their building so that, teachers at their building have certain students that they're checking in with each week. So, so I guess that I just wanted you to know that does like drive us, and it's at the root of all the things that we're doing.
And this is Matt, and at the risk of saying this, repeating something that we said just in a different way, it's important that we guard against not having a 5,000-foot screwdriver at the district office level and determining how a teacher engages specifically with individual children. They have our professional trust that they know what is best for kids and how to creatively engage with students in this content. Some teachers might choose to do a full class meeting, some might do small groups, some might do individual, and they know their students best. And so we're going to rely on their expertise and their creativity to create the best individual learning plan for students that we can possibly have for the next 5 weeks.
Yeah, and to add on to that, one of the things that Sarah and I have planned with once these Canvas courses are built for pre-K 8, that we have our departments, our special education department, our ELL department will go over them and looking through that lens of access and support, and then be able to say, okay, here's some things we need to add to it so that our English language learners will be able to access this, or some of our special education students, or any students, just adding those ideas for parents for scaffolds if in case their students are struggling. So that was an added layer that we've added to it just to give it just one more, I guess, layer of access and one more access point. So having those departments help us and look at it on the back end, I think, and then those teachers and having that consistent curriculum across the district, it will allow the special education department and the ELL department also to look at that and say then how to support their teachers in supporting their students on their roster. So there's just a lot of layers that we're putting in place.
Thank you. Board members, do you have any other questions for Dr. Ahart related to his report?
Yeah, this is Kelly. And really quick, just with Kelly and Sarah jumping on, thank you for that preview of what that online learning is going to look like. And when you guys are starting to develop what those guides and tips are going to be for parents, are you looking at that from an aspect of also our parents who are non-English speakers and making sure that those are translated, but helping those parents as well to support their kids in their learning?
Yeah, last week we have started some of the deployment of those resources, just tips for engaging your families and students at home. And we've been leveraging our network through School Connects and our bilingual family liaisons to make sure that those messages are getting out as widely as possible. You'll what might have also noticed on our print resources, we made sure we translated at least the purpose of those resources in a number of languages, so parents would even be aware of what they are. But that's really important that, again, that access versus content piece, it's only as good as the people it reaches, right? And so using those resources that we have in place in those systems is really helping us make sure that we're getting those messages of support to as many people as we possibly can in a lot of different ways and a lot of different languages.
Kirsten, this is Terry. I just had one quick question. So I was actually online listening to the governor's press conference the day that all of the new educational requirements were being rolled out relative to distance learning, et cetera. And if I recall correctly, every district is required to either opt in or opt out. And if you opt out, then you have to make up the instructional time at some point. But I think I also heard that attendance would be taken, and there are other things that the state is going to require of us. How does that happen? How do we do that? When they said it, I didn't really quite understand it. And it's making even less sense now that you're describing the means by which we intend to do the distance learning for our district. So, I mean, is that a hard fast, or is there wiggle room there? I'm trying to connect the dots.
Yeah, the attendance is taken if you do mandatory or compulsory learning. So there's the opt-out, do nothing, and then you make the days up. And then there's the voluntary learning. So you provide voluntary learning. You don't have to take attendance for that. And that's what we're doing. What we just described for our pre-K is still voluntary learning. We're supporting it and we're encouraging it and we're connecting to it, but we are not requiring it. We're not giving grades. We're not giving assessments. We're not giving course credits, anything like that. So that's why we will not have to take attendance.
Okay, that's helpful. And then my other question is, when's the last time we would have done some sort of assessment that allows us to determine sort of prior to COVID-19 when we closed, where were our students? When's the last time we have something that would sort of give us an ending point as we transition into sort of this nothingness? I mean, it is something, but it's not the same sort of instruction, if you will.
Right. That would be our winter screeners. That would be in our winter fast that we reported on and our winter map.
Okay.
And for high school who doesn't take winter map, we would look at grades, which is potentially part of our board goal. And then some other measures that did happen. For instance, ACT happened in February. It's not as clean as MAP for middle school and elementary, but there are some other things we could look at.
Yeah, and I'd also mention that while we didn't completely tie up every loose end, we have the vast majority of our ELL state tests completed prior to spring break.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see sort of in this time where we're sort of doing the voluntary educational enrichment or whatever we call it. And then we get ready to move back into regular classroom instruction in the fall, just to see what happened during that time frame. I say that because I am particularly concerned for our ELL students, our minority students, those who are not like Rob, who are actively engaged with their children, who have the tools and who are equipped to support the needs of their children in the interim. We have so many that just either aren't equipped, aren't interested, are really going to allow their kids literally to do nothing. And that's where I worry the most about, sort of the decision that we've made. All of those kids that are going to literally fall through the cracks, where in many instances, we're going to literally have to start over almost a whole year's worth of instruction because many of them are already behind. So that's a challenge that I think we have to own. But I think it's something that we're going to really have to figure out as we prepare to move into next year, because I'm really concerned about those students.
Terry, I'm very glad that you lifted that up, and I think that our team's approach to this, I think, differs materially from all the conversations happening in all the other districts that I've been in contact with, trying to garner support for forcing a different decision from the state. And it seems that the conversation at the district level, not DMPS, but at the district level around the state, and certainly at the state, is purely a compliance issue. And that's not good enough for us. I mean, it pains me to think of, there's thousands of our students that, whether the state's going to require us to make up time and blah, 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 I really don't care about. What I care about is we have kids who literally are going to be behind. It's going to set their educational arc behind, by 2 or 3 years if we don't double down and really make contact, which is why it was so important for us to cut the cord on, treading water on this. We might come back in 2 weeks, or we might come back in 3 weeks, or we might come back in 4 weeks, and really focus all of our resources on getting something meaningful in front of all of our students as expeditiously as possible. And now trying to marshal the resources so that when we have capacity from a COVID-19 perspective to bring kids back, that we have the resources to get them back physically in front of our teachers, so that we can, do our level best to recoup what right now is worse than just lost time. Because this is lost time with a tremendous amount of stress and trauma, quite frankly, that these kids and families are facing during this time.
Thank you.
All right, thank you for that. Without any board questions, I'm going to go ahead and adjourn our meeting, and I think we should reconvene for our work session in about 5 minutes at 8:20. I just need to, take care of a couple things real quick, and then I'll be back. Does that sound good, board? Oh, I think you're muted, Terry.
8:20 sharp.
Yep.
All right.
Sounds good. Thank you, board. Thank you, staff, for being on with us tonight, and thank you, guests, for joining us.